Hello and welcome once again to Whispers in the Darkness, the paranormal podcast from the Out There Paranormal Group. And whispering for you today on this episode we have myself, Nigel.
And myself, Juliette.
We've got a guest.
We have.
Another guest.
And who is this person?
Well, I've got an introduction here. I'm just going to run my way through it. Okay. He's an author, a journalist, a film critic and public speaker. He writes a monthly column for the Fortean Times. You can listen to him on Frightful, a podcast telling tales of the paranormal. Mm-hmm. An ordained reverend with a fascination for the macabre. He's just a bit sicker than your average vicar.
He is.
Yes, it's the sinister minister in person, Mr. Peter Laws.
Hello.
Hello, Peter.
Hello. I love that he's sicker than your average vicar, which is really saying something because there's some pretty sick vicars out there. It's impressive.
It's true, actually, yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so
good
much
to be
for agreeing to be a guest on our podcast. We wanted to speak to you for a little while, but it's been a case of trying to get things organised, and it hasn't always been that easy. But we've got us both here today, and we're both quite willing to have a chat with you, just find out a little bit more
about you. So tell us about you, Mr. Laws. Reverend Laws.
As you've heard, I suppose some of the weird things about me is that of my interests sometimes confuse people. So the fact that I am ordained as a minister can make people assume that therefore I would be not only not interested in things like horror films and ghosts and all that, but actively against them, and would actually be trying to sort of campaign against people being interested in those things. But actually, I've always been interested in spooky things, and I've been interested in those things before I ever set foot in a church. I started going to church in my early 20s, and up until that point, I was actually very anti-Christian. I used to go into the RE teacher's room when she wasn't there, and I would get all of the Bibles out, and I would get a ballpoint pen, and I would sort of circle Satan in all of the school Bibles just to tick her off. I remember one night I got really drunk with my friends in the park and tried to find where a local church was having a Bible study house group, and just turned up at this house group to say like, "Hi, can't you let me in?" And then went in and sort of gave them a hard time about their faith, and I'd deliberately written a note, a note suggesting that there was like a coven of witches that were going to attack the church, and I tucked it down their sofa. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, right? But there was something about Christians that just wound me up, because I felt that they were telling me I wasn't allowed to be interested in scary horror movies or ghosts or whatever, but also they just seemed to be completely irrelevant to me. And the only Christians I could see on TV were like Harold Bishop from Neighbours or Dot Cotton from EastEnders, which were hardly like the role models I was aiming for.
Well, you totally break the mold, don't you?
Well, I guess so, but I suppose particularly because I'm quite happy to retain this interest in scary and sometimes quite horrible things alongside a spiritual side. And for some Christians, that can be difficult. Like I've been to interviews on Christian radio stations, for example, where I've discovered later that the presenter has been asking people to pray for protection, because if I'm coming in, I'm probably bringing some sort of demonic influence.
Gosh,
so
really?
So I've had that a little bit, but on the whole, it's mostly okay.
I was going to ask you actually with that, because when, obviously being an ordained reverend, how does that fit? How does your interest sort of fit in with the spiritual side, the religious side of it? How do they fit together? Because
for me,
as you
are...
said... Yeah, go on.
Sorry, for me, they're kind of inextricably linked in the sense that when I was growing up as a teenager, really interested in the paranormal and scary things, but Christianity, like I've mentioned, didn't seem really relevant to that, whereas horror films and the paranormal to me were were actively discussing the very same topics these religious people were claiming to represent: the afterlife, the possibility of eternity, even the existence of objective good and evil. These are all big subjects that you often hear people who are interested in the paranormal and ghosts and stuff talking about. But when they talked about it, it was kind of more interesting. It was way more interesting for someone in my town to say, hey, I think that West House just up the corner there, it's haunted. That to me was like an immediate expression of the type of things religious people talk about. But the religious people were saying, well, go to church, God's invisible, and so just trust in him, but you might not see him, or you might not get much evidence of it. And so I guess my point is they were both speaking the same language. They were talking about the potential of something beyond death. And that's really what drew me.
When you talk about, when you talking about religion and that side, they talk about the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and they talk about, obviously we know about Jesus rising up after death and things like that. So there is that element of if you like, ghosts or life after death.
It's kind of in there, isn't it? It's mixed in with that message. You've got that message of him coming back to sort of save you. Well, he's dead, but he's come back. So what does he come back at? He's come back as a ghost.
Yeah.
But then there's that other bit where they sort of say, well, you don't have ghosts, you go to either up or down, and there's no in between. Or is there an in between? Because does purgatory still exist in the sort of Christian church?
For certain traditions, they do believe in purgatory. Not for me particularly. I think for me, when it comes to these sorts of topics, another thing that can actually frustrate people is that I can be quite non-committal, in the sense that I also think life is very mysterious. And so even though I am, I'd call myself a Christian, I still have room for doubt. I still have room for not being sure, but my feet point towards a certain direction, and it's towards the direction of, I've always got a mustard seed of faith that there is something else. And well, particularly Jesus said, you only need a mustard seed to move a mountain. So even just having that amount is significant. But I think for some people, they think, oh, well, I've got to be all in. So I've got to fully believe this stuff, whether it's God or ghosts, or I've got to be fully against it, and then I'm a skeptic. But I think for a lot of us, we're kind of on the spectrum, we're like drift between those things. And I would say, even though I have room for doubt, I tend to always drift towards I think there's something.
I mean, there has to be. I mean, based on my personal experiences, because, I can sense spirit, or at least I believe I can sense spirit. There has to be something. I mean, for me to get information and things like that, I have no idea where it comes from. I don't know how it happens. I will never claim to know how it happens. But I have had things that...
Yeah, you just think, where did that come from, and how did you know that? And
that's the thing. And how it all connects. There's got to be something in it. Something yet we don't yet understand.
We haven't quite got a grasp of, which is what I was so interested in.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unknown area, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I do believe. I strongly believe in the power of good. I believe in the power of evil. I work with angels when I do what I do, because I do believe in angels and things like that. And I don't think it would make a dramatic difference, or should I say it could make a difference, believing in the power of good, because I think if enough people believe in the power of good and positivity, I think that whole life force can sustain as well, and build up that energy into that. So I do believe there's a lot of energy, a good energy and a bad energy, and manipulating that. I think there might be some science behind that, but we're just not at that point yet, are we?
I'm going to understand it now.
And I can't wait for the day where religion and science will mix and they will find a common ground, because at the moment they're so far away, aren't they?
Well, I mean, I actually think the idea that religion and science are at odds with one another is actually sometimes over exaggerated, because in a sense science is in many ways was kind of spearheaded by religious people, because the idea behind particularly Christianity, but also other religions, was, look, there is an order to the universe. There is some sort of system, and therefore it's quantifiable. And so science makes sense, because you can try and work out, certain things happen, and there's certain, everyone's born, lives and dies, or the planets move in certain ways. And so therefore we're not living in complete chaos. And so we have the potential to log and understand in a small amount. So science is, trying to seek that knowledge of trying to work out the patterns. So I don't think you have to kind of choose between science or religion. I have loads of science friends who are also religious or spiritual. Yeah. And I think this idea that you have to choose between the two is, again, it goes back into that tribalism that we're talking about before, that insistence. And this is a particularly interesting thing happening in our culture now. It's like, make your decision, like which group are you in? And and then through things like social media or whatever, start to curate your contacts so that you retain the same types of people. And that leads to a kind of lack of empathy for others, I think. And so for me, I'm just really interested in the bundle of it all, and I'm quite happy to say I'm not fully sure. By the way, even though I am ordained as a church minister, for the past, say, 10 years or something, because of the writing side of things that I did, that took off. I've been doing that really for the last 10 years. So even though I do, speak at churches every now and then and do different things here and there, I'm not actively responsible for a church at the moment, which I quite enjoy, because it means I'm able to do all of this other kind of freaky, weird stuff. But yeah, I can still technically tick Reverend on forms and stuff like that.
Well, it spreads the word in a different way as well, doesn't it? Because you're accessing groups that maybe wouldn't think about that sort of thing, whereas people now, for instance, we're doing this podcast, so we'll be throwing it out to people that are interested in the paranormal and things like that, people that maybe sort of be anti-religious or whatever, and they're looking at you and thinking, actually, you know what, he's a really clever chap, and he's saying some interesting things. So that then gives the people that chance then to open their minds a little bit more and think about what's going on. So I think it's good. I think it's the fact that you've actually taken that on board and gone across both sides. I think it's really, really good.
Yeah, thank you. And but what's interesting is, if I had met me when I was a teenager, I would have had just pure suspicion, because I'd be like, you're only interested in this stuff because you want to convert me. This is like a clever sort of wolf in sheep's clothing type thing. You don't give a toss about my interests or my life. You ultimately are just pretending to like horror films and scary paranormal things, so that ultimately you will lead it to the conversation of, well, will you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? Like a sort of a hardcore evangelical approach. And so I do sometimes feel like that's a suspicion that I would have had about me. So therefore there must be people out there who think, really, I'm just out to kind of try and convert people. But I'm just not. I'm much more interested in trying to kind of, this is going to sound very Oprah Winfrey about it, but sort of like journey with people and go alongside as fellow mystery busters, to try and understand what's going on, and to try and break down the barriers between those groups. Because like I said earlier, I think we're stronger when we make connection with other people.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's so very true.
Definitely.
So tell us about your Matt Hunter series of books that you've written, because I understand that's crime fiction with a little bit of paranormal thrown in.
Yeah, that's right. That was a kind of cool experience. It was when I was working as a minister, actually, about 10 or 11 years ago. I was in post as a church minister, and I was walking with my wife one day, and I kind of saw a cow in a field, and it was quite inspiring. I don't know why.
Okay.
But it just made me kind of go, oh, that's an interesting cow. And it made me start thinking about a story idea, which ironically didn't involve a cow, but it did involve, basically a character who used to be a church minister but is now an atheist professor and spends his time debunking the Christian faith, but also has all of this knowledge, so he gets called in to help with cases that involve weird religious maniacs. And I just thought, that'd be something I'd read. So I decided to start writing a novel. And long story short, it took me a little while. a lot of frustration and tears in the kitchen, getting rejection letters and stuff, going, oh, this is never going to happen for me. But then amazingly got a 2-book deal, and then then since then the first book came out 2017, and now I've had about five books out since then, which is really an amazing experience for me.
They're very good, I have to say.
Is there a little bit of you in there? Yeah. Is that all based on your personal experiences? Have you put those into the books?
Yeah, people who read it often say they think they're reading it about me, but in my head I'm not picturing. I am vain. Don't get me wrong. I'm as vain as much as anyone else. The world revolves around me. That's kind of the human condition, isn't it? We tend to think about ourselves a lot, but I don't think about myself that much that I'm literally writing a book, a fantasy world for me. I do think of him as a different person, and when I'm writing him, he's another man. But at the same time, he is a side of me. I think he's an expression of my doubtful side, an expression of my cynical side. And I was going to
ask you that. Yeah, if you had sort of used him to sort of put out any of your misgivings that you actually have as a sort of an exit to sort of then say, look, I wouldn't say this in church, but I can say it in my book, I don't like this and I don't like that, so...
Yes, in a way, but also, I would probably just say it anyway, but it's just to give balance. Like, what I don't like is sadly I've seen, say, atheists that have been just so dismissed by believers, or skeptics dismissed by believers, as if, like, how could you possibly not believe this stuff? It's so obvious. And to me, atheism or skepticism is a perfectly reasonable approach to the world. And so in those books, I wanted to kind of honor that worldview. And so Matt Hunter is a very clear skeptic. But then, of course, weird things start happening, and there's like weird kind of black rabbit demons and all this sort of jazz in the books that start occurring. But it always leaves you with a Scooby-Doo-esque, like, is it really the supernatural, or is it, maybe not Scooby-Doo, because it was always natural then, wasn't it? More like The Omen, the film The Omen. I'm a really fan of, from the 70s, Richard Donner film.
That film.
And what I love about The Omen is that you can watch that film as a believer and say, oh my word, the Antichrist is like killing people, chopping their heads off and all that jazz. But you can also watch that film as a skeptic and say, wow, there's an example of people allowing their beliefs to run away with them, and
that's true, yeah.
just see a bunch of unfortunate accidents and put this narrative around them that maybe it's supernatural. So for me, I like working in that middle ground where you just don't know.
So did other writers influence you? People like Stephen King and things like that? Did you read those kind of books when you were younger?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Stephen King growing up, and I used to read Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, who's a great author from the 20s and 30s. I used to read books like that, but would deliberately... as a kid, I'd sit up on the windowsill of my bedroom and switch all the lights off just so I could read them to the light of the street light outside, because that was a bit more atmospheric, and I'd be playing kind of spooky film soundtracks. And I've retained that sort of sense of ambience when I watched the Blair Witch Project for the first time, for example. I made sure that all the lights in the house were off and that the back door was open, so that just in case something could come in while I was watching it. But just gave me a bit of a thrill.
I enjoyed that movie. I was amazed because it actually was really low budget, wasn't it, when it was produced?
Yeah, incredibly so, yeah. And it became like a bit of a phenomena. Although it wasn't the first found footage horror movie out there that people seem to think it was. It wasn't, but it was still the big one that made a difference.
It certainly took off, didn't it? So you've done your writing, which is fantastic, and you've also got The Frighteners, haven't you, which...
That was
really interesting book.
That was an incredible book to write. I was so pleased to get that. In fact, the way The Frighteners came about, it's basically a non-fiction book called The Frighteners: Why We Love Monsters, Ghosts, Death and Gore. Though I think in America it's got a different subtitle, like A Journey Through Our Cultural Fascination with the Macabre. And that book was written, it started being written, to be honest, because I wasn't getting a book deal for fiction. So I thought, crap, this is never going to happen for me. So I came up with a non-fiction proposal and asked my agent to send that out as a backup. And then the fiction deal came through, and then a few months later the non-fiction deal came through as well, which I was just totally amazed with. But it did mean that I had to write my second novel in the same year as I wrote The Frighteners, So I wouldn't recommend writing a novel and a non-fiction book in one year.
No, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, that was. Although it was a lot of amazingly fun work to write The Frighteners, because that took me to Transylvania and to Rome and all across Britain, interviewing people who were fascinated by the macabre.
Jealous now.
It was so, honestly, it was great fun. But it was also me having experience. It's kind of like even though you'll find it in the sort of popular psychology section, probably of Waterstones, it's not an academic text. It's more like Louis Theroux has weird experiences and pontificates on them. So it was me, meeting like people who are obsessed with horror. Like at one point, the BBC blindfolded me and took me in a car into the middle of nowhere, into this weird mansion where there was this witch and a one-eyed butler, and they strapped me to electric chairs and threw spiders on me and did weird things like that. Or I went on a werewolf hunt in Hull with a historian to try and explore why we like monsters. And got chased by zombies through a nuclear bunker in Essex. Just loads of kind of crazy experiences. But the point of the book was to ask, why does this matter to us? Because you could say it's quite weird. Like the people who listen to this, they might find their hearts skip a little beat when someone talks about, oh, did you know that the person in the house down the road died, and they say something's going on in the house. Like, really, you would think that would be like, well, we should back off from that. And yet there's something in the human psyche that says, pay attention to this. And for some of us, it's particularly so. We actually get excited by it. You could almost say we are comforted by it. This is one of the fascinating things that I found, that for some people, horror films and ghost stories are comforting. They bring a sense of peace. When really, you would think, well, me watching the Blair Witch Project, let's say, should unsettle me. And yet I return to some of the horror films I watched as a kid, and they make me feel better. And so the book was to try and understand why that is. And the conclusion was to say that it is completely natural to be interested in these topics, and it would be absurd not to be interested in things like death and, well, when it's relevant to us all, isn't it? And suffering and the potential for something afterwards. So, yeah, it was a fun book to write, a real privilege.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, I read it, bought you a copy for Christmas, didn't I, as well? Yeah. So it's really, really cool. I mean, I love the fact that you sort of cover so many different aspects of it as well. It's just a simple fact of, like, ghosts. The one that got me was the murder memorabilia stuff that people were actually buying.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. Yeah, I went to York to hold a lock of Charles Manson's hair in my hand, because there was a dealer there selling it for £40 a strand. And people were having locks of serial killers' hair in kind of lockets around their neck, and that was kind of a strange chapter to write. But again, it was, well, I mean, I won't go into why, but the book explains why even an interest in true crime and even serial killers, there is a logic behind it. There's a sociological logic behind why we might want to explore these things. But on the surface, and this is, I suppose, the main point, on the surface, it just looks like there's something wrong with you, like you're a freak. There's people out there who will... There's an author called Lynn Hatcher who he talks about the spooky gene, and he says that some people have the spooky gene and some people don't. And the people with the spooky gene are sometimes baffled why wouldn't you be interested in this? Whereas others who don't have it can look at people like us and think, you're a freak. You're interested in very dark things. Like you have pictures, might have coffins on your socks or something, or like that's weird. And for some people, I felt like, I guess the pastoral part of me, sad for those who feel isolated and lonely, and that there's something wrong with them, particularly if they're from a religious community and they're told they're being demonic because of their interest in it. So the book was also trying to say, hey, it's okay. You're not a freak. It's very normal to like this stuff. And if your friend doesn't like it, that's them. But don't feel bad that you like it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I mean, I've had experiences where I've spoken to very extreme religious people, and they've actually got quite upset with me.
Yeah. Can I just say, hang on a second, because you don't seem to be very loud on here, Jules. Can you hear Juliette all right?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I mean, both of your voices are definitely lower than mine, but
Yeah.
I don't think your microphone is
Mic's up here,
quite far away, isn't it?
I think I need to move it a bit closer.
Maybe I should move a bit closer and scare everybody.
I think you're all right.
You're sitting on my dress. You see, this is Nigel trying to be clever with gadgets. There we go.
Is that better?
That's better, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great.
You had it on the wrong way round.
Had a bloody microphone on the stand the wrong way round.
Oh,
Okay.
classic.
Anyway.
You can always re-record your questions. If the earlier ones didn't feel right, you could always re-record your questions and just drop in my answers, because I think I kind of gave fairly long answers rather than a lot of give and take.
Have a look at it and see.
So
honestly, I can't believe it.
I'm loving this. I'm finding this really interesting.
Oh, I could shoot myself, honestly.
No, don't worry about it.
Or just ask me stuff again, whatever you like.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I found really interesting is I mean, you have, well, people have, like, extreme religious people, they will look at people like us who do have an interest in death and the paranormal and the macabre. They can look at us and think, I've been accused of fraternizing with Satan. I've had people get very angry with me. I've had people tell me that I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, and this is one thing we don't do, is we don't conjure or any of that faffing about and Ouija boards. We don't touch anything because I don't agree with it, to be honest. But even when I contact spirit, you know, and do it, you know, in a very kind way, in a very gentle way, and do it to help, I do have people getting very angry, telling me that I'm messing with things I don't understand. And I mean, have you come across that kind of stuff?
Oh yes,
people?
yeah, definitely. And I've been to, like, sometimes I've spoken at paranormal conferences, for example, and had messages from Christian friends just saying, like, you be careful. And even though that can sound really offensive, it's also born of a kind of worldview that is saying, you know, that there's a spiritual war going on, and you know, it's risky. So I'm not that type of person. I tend to be, no, like, we're all kind of trying to work out what the hell's going on in life. So I want to join with them. But if you've been brought up with a sense of, you know, the devil is waiting, and particularly, I mean, you know, I did some writing recently on the Satanic panic of the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, people feeling like heavy metal or Dungeons and Dragons or horror films in particular were going to warp their children. There is this sense of kind of Satan is just waiting behind a bush to leap out and grab you. And so you can kind of understand, I suppose, why some people would not want that to happen. But my point is, you know, maybe that's not necessarily what's happening. But you mentioned the Ouija board. I made a Ouija board in woodwork at school.
Did you?
Yeah, it's well easy. You know, like other people are kind of making.
That.
No, it was just a really easy thing, because, like, literally you just got to. You just, like, cut off a bit of MDF or whatever, because I'm not into this sort of woodwork stuff. So I was like, what's the easiest thing to make? What am I interested in? So I just cut off this, like, rectangle and then wrote on with pen. I didn't even, like, etch it or whatever they do. Wrote on the letters with pen and made a little kind of planchette. And, took that home. And, me and my friends used to do the Ouija board quite a bit. And I did the Ouija board by myself loads when I was kind of 15, 16.
Wow.
I remember I did one on holiday once. We went to Pontins, and when I was a kid, and I don't know, some like Elvis impersonator playing one night, and do you want to come and see him? And I was like, no, I'm going to stay in. And I stayed in.
Gonna meet him on the Ouija board.
Actually, I'll hang out with the real thing.
Yeah, that's it.
But that Ouija board I made at school, I actually did end up taking it back in about a week or so later, because some unpleasant things happened with it, and which could be explained or not. I just don't know for certain. But me and my friends using it, and some sort of like ancient spirit of a dead witch, that could have just been us subconsciously pushing it. I'm open to that. Yeah. But saying stuff like, "You're all gonna die," you know, so, like, Bob's gonna die first, then Peter's gonna, and these sorts of things. That's a bit of a bummer. That's not getting me in the weekend mood. So I did take the Ouija board back into woodwork, and I put it through an industrial saw. And then I remember seeing one of the Christians in the class see me drop it into the bin, and just so good for you.
You've seen the light.
Well done.
Yeah, but of course I hadn't. I mean, I kept being interested in all these things. But then when I did become a Christian, which shocked everybody, not least me, when I did become a Christian at university, I do remember I wrote a letter to my RE teacher apologizing for how I treated her, because there was just something about this happens in life, but this happens with religion. We have like psychological transference on other people, so we make assumptions of the other person. So if we've had really crappy bosses or head teachers or teachers, we can be in a scenario where the authority figure, we just go, oh well, he's not going to like me, or he's going to be too strict, or she's going to be horrible, or whatever, and we haven't even connected with the person. We're placing previous bad people on top of those people. And this happens with religion and Christianity. I realized what I'd done is I didn't know these people at all. I just placed my stereotype of what I thought they were, and so I was nasty to the stereotype in my head rather than the real person. And I felt bad about that.
I think we've all been guilty of that at some point or another.
Exactly.
To be honest,
Definitely.
I know I can put my hand up and say, historically I've done that, and had a bad experience with the person and expected somebody else to come along and behave the same way.
Yeah.
I think we're all guilty.
Judge beforehand, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you have some kind of weird Road of Damascus moment then, when you sort of suddenly discovered religion, or did it just sort of gradually come on?
Well, I met a girl in a nightclub.
Here we go.
Yeah, so it wasn't really the road to Damascus; it was the road to the bar. Like I was going to the bar to buy a pint of lager, and I met this girl who was really fit, and I was like, wow, like I wasn't really into commitment in those days. I won't go into depth into that, but I wasn't into commitment. Let's say that. And but I was like, I'd be her boyfriend. Like she's so just perfect, like my perfect like image of what a girl would be. And anyway, I asked her out, and it turned out she was a Christian, and she said, look, this matters to me, and I'm not really into having just flings these days. I'm getting a bit older, and so I don't want to go out with you if you're really against this sort of thing. And at the time I thought, well, it's a little bit weird, but then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to the Christian Union then, and if I take a passing interest in this stuff, maybe she'll like me.
Yeah.
But also inside I thought, I had a few friends die when I was late teens, and made you ask some questions, and I thought, well, I'm feeling a little bit more open to these things, so I went along to the Christian Union. And I just was very shocked to discover that when I met real people, not stereotypes, I was like, hang on a minute, these guys are like really intelligent, they're scientists, they're like they're tutors of the but also they're a good laugh. Some of them weren't a good laugh, and some of them were freakish, don't get me wrong, but some of them were like, these are normal people. And I put my stereotype to the side, and then in time, over that year, I just started to think, crikey, maybe my antagonism towards Christianity was because there was something about this God thing that was maybe pushing buttons with me. So I one night I decided I'm going to give it a go, and sort of prayed a prayer, as they say. Walked out of a room, and the sky looked different. It was really bizarre. It was like flashing blue and stuff. maybe it was a drugs flashback from a few earlier years ago, and I just my life just changed. And I think the only reason and I'm not saying Christianity is better than anything else, I'm just saying the reason why that resonated with me rather than just a general spirituality was that it was more than just there's something after death. It was more like, oh, there's an actual kind of companion, like a personality, the Jesus bit, like a friend who is with me. And I thought, I need that, I want that.
Yeah.
And so it became a Christian, and everyone at home when I went back was like, I thought you were a devil worshipper. But it was still up and down since then. I'm not claiming to be a a full-on strong. I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm very open-minded. In fact, I'd probably be classed as a dodgy Christian amongst some Christians because of my open-mindedness. But it's been a truly amazing resource for me. Yeah.
You've explored sort of quite a lot with your podcasts as well, haven't you? Because you've got your creepy Cove community church as well that you do.
Yeah, that's a bit weird. Yeah.
I've got, we want to hear. Tell us about the weirdness. Come on.
In lockdown, actually, my latest novel came out at the beginning of lockdown. It's about a novel about demonic possession. Fun stuff. And then, but actually, once lockdown hit, I wasn't even in the mood to write or read. I didn't read any books for 6 months. I just was reading Viz. I just couldn't be bothered. Yeah, I was reading really short things, and I just couldn't be bothered to read even a book, novels or nonfiction. But so I started to get my creative juices flowing doing podcasting. I'd done podcasting before, but I got back into podcasting, and I created this podcast, which is pretty wacky, which is called Creepy Cove Community Church, and it's been described as like Stephen King meets Songs of Praise, and it's a full church service.
Brilliant.
But it's broadcast from a mysterious fishing town where all horror movies actually happened, and so it's meant to be kind of a safe space for people who are interested in things like this to get encouragement. So there's a sermon, often from me, but sometimes from guest people. But the sermon is not preachy. It's literally about things like, being encouraged in your mental health, or, having empathy for other people, just like normal stuff that people need, and I need.
So if anybody wanted to have a listen to these, what is your website for this?
Yeah, if they go to peterlaws.co.uk, and they'll find links to, say, creepycove.com, which is where this church one is. And then also the one that I started recently, which is the much more popular one, ironically, is the scary true stories one. That's called Frightful, and I'm doing that for an American podcast company. And that's been a lot of fun to do. That is, basically people, me narrating with kind of full sound and music and effects. Scary stories of the paranormal to true crime to creepy, bizarre cults, and because that's been successful, I've now been asked to write and host another podcast called Hometown History Europe, and that's looking at that's slightly less scary, but that's doing the same sort of thing as Frightful, but exploring interesting or remarkable stories of history in European towns and cities, and that's been a new experience for me. But it's been a lot of fun. And related to that, I'll just get this little plug in here. Related to that is there's a Patreon where people, if they want to get ad-free episodes of that, they can. But they also get extras from me and video extras and behind-the-scenes stuff and free cups and all this sort of jazz. But it's good. But what I like about that sort of thing, it does build up a little community and a sort of connection with people. So it's great.
It's quite nice, yeah. I mean, just sort of rolls on to the next thing, talking about community, is I have to confess, this is a horrible thing to have to say, I picked you up from the Uncanny podcast, Danny Robbins, and it immediately sort of attracted my interest, because I suddenly thought, well, there's a reverend on here talking about interesting stuff, and I'm one of those sort of blinkered people that thinks the same, Christians are they're not going to look outside the sides, and then I was listening to you, and you're on the Room 611 one, and the stuff that you were saying, that's really interesting. So then, of course, I went and looked for you, thinking, has he got a website or something like that? And then I found you, and I'm thinking, wow, really, really interesting. Yeah. But it's just the fact, like you said, about building communities. The thing I love about those podcasts and the fact that you've involved with them is the fact that it's built up this really weird community that goes around it, and people that actually are in that community don't argue with each other.
It's really
There's this real sort of understanding, real open-mindedness about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is not to be underestimated. I think that is probably one of the key fuels that keeps that engine going, is not so much the topic, although the topic, of course, is the sort of the bread and butter of why we're fascinated by this. But there's millions of groups that explore these topics. But what these groups often do will be, they will rattle into their category. at one point. So it'll be like, well, get yourself into your believer category or your skeptic category. And then once you do that, you start to define yourself by what you're not. So you say, oh, well, we're not. Oh, have you seen what the stupid skeptics are saying about this? Or have you seen about these gullible spiritual types who say this? What's good about the Uncanny community, I think, is that there's space for both voices to be heard. And that's something not only that's to be encouraged, but it's also to be maintained. And I think any member of that community has a kind of, well, not a duty, but it's just if they want that to continue, there has to be that giving space for mutual respect. And you kind of want to be careful that it doesn't drift in one direction or another. But yeah, people just want to be empathized with, and like heard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it's a fun show to be part of.
I can imagine. Yeah. So did he just sort of contact you out of the blue, or?
Yeah. I can't remember if I had dealings with Danny before, but I got a message from him, and then it was good because I got to have a Zoom call with Ken and some of the other witnesses and just find out a little bit more. And then I was on a later episode as well, and it's just it's one of those shows that just it well, they call it zeitgeisty, don't they? But to me, what is interesting to a community or a society or a world is interesting in of itself. It's kind of, you take the pulse of what people are interested in, and people were saying really, like a few decades ago, that all of this sort of interest would gradually die out. As more and more answers come from science or technology, we wouldn't have a need to ask questions about spirituality or God or ghosts or demons or all this sort of stuff. And yet that persists, that keeps going on. And I think that just will keep going on.
Yeah, it hasn't gone. I mean, in fact, highlighting it with things like this as well brings it more sort of to people, because a lot of things you see when people are commenting on the shows is like, well, I never realised that, or I've had this experience, and everybody's sort of opening up and saying stuff about it, and it's really interesting to see that there's so many people that have had those sort of experiences that want the answers to the questions.
Yeah, that's actually something, when I was writing The Frighteners, and there's a chapter on the supernatural and why people are drawn to that. And I remember at the beginning of that naively thinking that people who were interested in the supernatural and kind of studying it and reading books and reading the Fortean Times and things, the reason why they did that was just that they had that spooky gene in them and that they were just fascinated by the topic. And then I interviewed a guy called Alan Murdy, who's the chairman of the Ghost Club. He's a really nice guy. Interviewed him, and he said something which struck me. He said, "Oh, Peter, like a lot of the people who are interested in this are interested not because they had a previous fascination, but because something inexplicable happened in their life, and now they're trying to understand it." So that made me think, oh yeah, sometimes this topic just crashes into a normal world and makes you go, wait, that doesn't make sense, I want to understand it. So it's not like everyone who's interested in the paranormal has done it through choice. Some have done it through force and are seeking to understand it.
Right. Hang on a sec, because I need to plug my computer in.
Okay. Is that a euphemism for you need the toilet?
No, it's a euphemism that I've got thinking upside down battery.
Gotta plug my computer in.
There you go. Oh God, have we got a spare socket?
Oh gosh, just unplug the nearest one.
You sure? Which one's your router?
Yeah, don't unplug the router. We will.
How close are we? How close are we to the battery running out?
We're nearly there. He's just plugging in.
No, I was on about how close are you to the battery running out? Like how?
Oh, it gave me a warning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It will. The Mac is about to go to sleep, so we're going to wake it up. Make sure it doesn't.
You do mouth to mouth.
There we go. Honestly, we're so well organised, aren't we?
Okay. Right, we're not going to die now.
Here we go.
Can we get back?
Yes, we're fine. Just right. Okay. Where were we?
So, what I was going to ask you is, so you've mentioned your podcast, your new podcast that you're working on at the moment. Yeah. What else are you going to be working on in the future? You said this afternoon you're going to be doing some writing. So, tell us what's coming up.
I mean, today is it's a Hometown History Europe Day, and so I'm currently writing about like a massive riot in Constantinople in the 5th century, which is fun. And then I'm going to be writing also for that show, exploring a weird dancing plague that happened in Strasbourg, where a woman started dancing, and she couldn't stop, and then other people started to dance with her. And then by the end of the month, hundreds of people were dancing, and some of them dancing themselves to death and could not stop.
Wow.
And they were so
and this
exhausted.
is true. This actually happened.
Yeah, this is really happened. Dancing plagues have happened.
Wow.
In history, and so this show involves research, but also sometimes location stuff, and then also interviews. So I'm currently just kind of securing an interview with the author of one of the biggest books on that. So it'd be good to get his input, because it's so weird, isn't it? Like why people would dance themselves dizzy,
do
but
that?
Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's some kind of psychosomatic thing or
strange, isn't it?
Very interesting.
What makes you decide which stories to actually do then? Do you just sort of have a look and find them, or you do trawl through the internet?
That is the beauty of it. It's that, because I'm the lead writer on these things, you just write whatever you're interested in. And actually, to be honest, like particularly for Frightful, if anyone is listening to this and they have some cool, spooky, and preferably quite scary tales, get in touch with me, because I particularly want to cover things that other people haven't.
Right.
And I'm always on the lookout for exploring those. But what's quite nice about those shows is that it not only I can't resist. I don't know why, but I can't resist not only telling a scary story, but I kind of almost has a sort of like a Jerry Springer final thought. Based on it. But also what is also funny about those shows is even though patrons get their episodes ad-free, if you don't get it ad-free, then obviously you've got ads in it. And so I also have to do the adverts for it, which is hilarious. So it means that I might be... So honestly, I might be telling like a really
quite
heinous...
surreal as well.
It is. I might be telling a story of like a hideous cult suicide, and I'm like, and the families went into the basement and turned the guns on each other, even the children. And then the music will change, and I'll be like, "Are you getting your vitamins today? Well, head down to Walmart for 10% off.
Brilliant.
With this code, Frightful, whatever." And so I find that stuff really hilarious, but obviously it's quite off-putting for many listeners, which is why they join the Patreon instead. But so
join it, guys, because it is worth it.
We'll put links to everything that we've spoken about. We will put links to everything underneath, so you can actually go and grab hold. And I will actually put them across the bottom of the screen under the video as well, so you better see all of those, so you can go along and look at Frightful, look at the Critic Cove, join your Patreon, all the things that we need to do.
And how would people get in touch with you if they have a story or they want to talk to you about something? What would be the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, if you go to peterlaws.co.uk, and there's a contact form on there, so you can contact me through that, or follow me on Twitter is a good place, and then send me a message through that. That would be fantastic. But I'd love to hear from people.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
And there's a lot of stories yet to be told.
There are some fantastic ones.
So watch this space, ladies and gents.
It is indeed, yes. Peter, we'd just like to say thank you so much for bearing with us. We've had a bit of a nightmare once again with our recording, because some idiot put the microphone on the wrong way around, then the computer ran out of power, the usual things. But hopefully you've really enjoyed what we've had to say today. And Peter, you've been a fabulous guest.
It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.
And thank you for all you're doing, and for all the kind of the positive vibes you're bringing to this community.
Thank you so much. There we go. Peter Laws.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Peter. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. Thanks for that.
Thank you once again for taking the time to listen to our podcasts. And we'd just like to extend our thanks to the Reverend Peter Laws again for putting up with us. We did have a few technical issues, and we thought it might be quite nice to include them, so you can see that everything isn't perfect all the time when we try to do these things. We're changing the name of our podcast channel. We've decided to rebrand ourselves. The channel is now going to be called What's Out There rather than Whispers in the Darkness. We've taken this move to try and tie everything together with our group name, so it's easier to find us when you're searching for our podcasts. So rest assured, nothing else is going to change. The content's going to stay exactly as it is. It's going to be the same mix of interviews, stories, and all the other random things that we like to talk about in the wonderful world of the paranormal. So, What's Out There is our new podcast channel name, but basically it's staying the same. It's just had a change of name, if that makes sense. Thank you all once again, and we'll see you all again in the next episode. Goodbye for now.